Hey everybody, welcome back. Johnny B here with Devslopes.com, just playing our sweet game we're making. And it's turning out real nice. I'm just checking out the pathfinding, how that's working. It looks like it's working awesome. We got all of our enemies able to follow us up the staircases and all around. They're following real good. So this is turning out real good. I'm real happy with how this is looking. I mean, if you showed even just this to some friends, you know, they'd be blown away by what you're able to do. So let's continue on our way. Today we're going to implement some physics on our enemies. If you see right now, I can just walk right through these guys. So, you know, we're gonna work on that. We're going to get their weapons set up so that we can start working on attacks and monitoring the health of both the player and the enemies. So let's get to it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add some rigid bodies to our enemies, and we'll start with the tanker here. All right, so go ahead and select your tanker and go to add component, and we're going to add a physics item, and we're going to add the rigid body. Go ahead and expand that. You'll see here we have a few properties: mass, drag, angular drag, gravity, is kinematic, collision detection, etc. And I want to show you what it is like with the default settings. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play and watch down here. When I run into the, oh, I forgot, I need also a capsule collider. Okay, so rigid bodies are necessary to work with physics, but we also need a collider. So I'm going to go to physics and get a capsule collider. And you can see that there's a bunch of different types of colliders. We've been using some. We've used a box collider, we've used a mesh collider, but there's sphere colliders, there's the capsule collider, a wheel collider, and so they come in different sizes. They basically all do the same. All they do is check for collisions, and if we open this up, it can be a trigger. So if a collider is a trigger, then it ignores physics. So basically, it just checks for intersections into that sphere or capsule and says, hey, I've been intersected, and it can fire off a trigger for your scripts to recognize. For example, we're going to be using these to, you know, just check if the sword enters the enemy or something like that, okay? And so that's what the is trigger does. And if you see here in the scene, let me make this a little bit bigger, and we'll try to zoom in here on our tanker. You can see that the capsule is down here, so we need to move it up. So right now the center is at 0, 0, 0. Let's try 0, 1, 0, and we're going to make the height, let's say 1.5, and the radius 0.75. Let's see if that looks good. And I think that looks pretty good. That captures the essence of the body pretty well. So that looks pretty good to me. And so now we have our rigid body and we have our capsule collider. So now let's go ahead and play it. Let me make the game scene bigger. Okay, so I'm going to run into this guy. And now, as you can see, before I can't just move through him like I was before. But watch, when I hit him, he just goes flying and spinning, and just like a pinball in a pinball machine, just boing. Come here, you. So that's not ideal. So what we're going to do is we are going to work a little bit in our rigid body. And so we have drag and angular drag here. So drag and angular drag is a measure of how much resistance to motion in the physics world. So we're actually just going to put this at infinity, which we can do by INF and then pressing return, and then INF on the angular drag as well. And so that just, whoops, we don't want it to be kinematic. And so now when I play it, you'll see that when I run into him, he doesn't just go spinning off into nothing. I can still push him around, but he doesn't go spinning like crazy like he was before. And that's because we increased the angular and drag, the angular drag and the drag. So that looks good. and everything else is good. We want gravity to act on them. We don't want it to be kinematic. So kinematic is when physics don't act on the object, but physics can be acted by that object. Okay, and everything else looks good. We are going to use constraints on it. We are going to freeze position in the Y axis. We don't want it to be able to go up or down without meaning to. And we are going to freeze the rotation in the X and Z rotations. So we only want it to be able to rotate around the Y axis, okay? And that looks good for our tanker. Let's go ahead and play that again. Make sure he's still acting as expected. And that looks good. All right, so we are going to go ahead and do that for our other two enemies, our soldier. We are going to add a component. We're going to add a physics 2D and a capsule collider. And we're also going to add a, oops, did I do physics? Did I do 2D? Don't do 2D. Physics and a rigid body. All right, so for the capsule collider, let's check out our soldier here. Make our scene a little bit bigger, pan over to him. Okay. And you can see our, hold on, I see our capsule down here in green. We need to move the center up to 0 and 1, I think, and a height of 2. Looks just about perfect. Encapsulates him nicely. And we're going to do the same thing as we did for our tanker. We are going to change the drag to INF for infinity and INF for angular drag as well. And we're going to freeze the position in the Y, and we are going to freeze rotation in the X and Z axes. All right, so that looks good. I'm going to save it. And we're going to collapse those. And we're also going to do the same for our ranger. So we're going to add component, physics, capsule collider, add component, physics, rigid body. For our capsule collider, we're going to bump up the center to 1 in the Y and change the height to 2. Okay, and we can see how that encapsulates him just right. And then for our rigid body, we're going to change the drag to infinity, typing in INF, infinity, typing in INF. We want gravity, and we want to freeze it in the Y position, and then freeze rotation in the X and Z axes. All right, and that's just to make sure that, you know, if they fall over, they're not going to fall. They're just going to stay stuck in the Y axis of rotation, and that's what we want. I'm going to save it again and press play and check out. So now all of our enemies are we're able to push them around, and we have our colliders working. So that looks good. Man, that looks cool. All right, awesome. So close that back out. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to add our colliders for our weapons. So these are the colliders that we need to have on our weapons so that our player and the enemies can detect the hits from our attacks. And so let's start out with the tanker. And you may think what you need to do is add a collider to the weapon. So if we open up our tanker here in the hierarchy, you'll see we have orc tanker, which is the mesh of the model of the actual orc. Then we have orc tanker weapon and orc tanker weapon B. Okay, so you may think, okay, I need to add my box collider to these weapons here. And I'll show you why that doesn't actually work. So we're gonna don't do this. Just watch as I do it. So I'm gonna add a component. I'm gonna add a physics box collider. Okay. So then I'm going to let's see here. Let's shape this up a little bit so it's more like the box collider here. So I'm gonna change the size to maybe 0.5. Hold on. Come on. Good grief. 0.5 and 0.5. 0.5. And then let's move that just a touch that way, and a touch that way. All right, so now we have our collider, and it looks like it's right on our weapon, more or less, okay? Now I'm going to play it, and we're going to watch it in the scene because you can't see the box colliders in the gameplay, okay? So I'm going to play it. Oops, we're on maximize. So turn off maximize, play, and you see how the box collider does not stay attached to the, let me get back in here, does not stay attached to the actual hammer when we're in animation mode. So what we need to do is we need to actually add the box collider. So I'm going to remove this component. We need to actually add the box collider to the bones, okay? So the models have a bone structure, if you will. And so what we need to do is we need to find the bone that correlates to that, to the hammer. So if you open up the, right here, the BIP001, we get all of these things. You have pelvis, spine, thigh, calf, and so these are the bones of our model. And so what we need is actually right here on left hammer. Okay, so left hammer and right hammer. So on our left hammer, just going to navigate over here. See if we can get a better view here. And here we go. All right, that looks good. So here on our left hammer, its origin is right here. So we're going to say add component, and we're going to say physics 2D box collider. So that looks good. So now we want to change up the size a little bit. So I think in the X maybe 0.5, in the Y 0.5, and in the Z 0.5. And let's grab the axis right here. Oh, so you see if you grab the axis of the bone, the entire thing moves. So I'm going to Command Z that. So what we need to do is we need to change the center over here in the inspector, okay? So center, we want to change it in the, which axis is that? Oh no, darn it, I clicked off of our model and into the scene. All right, so sample scene, left hammer. Okay, so that's the X. So I'm going to change the center to maybe 1. Oh, no, wrong direction, -1. So that's pretty close. Let's say -0.9. And then let's change the size of the X so that it's a little bit a little bit thinner. Say 0.4. That looks good. And let's make it a little bit taller. So that's in the Z axis. So 0.6. 0.7. All right, that looks good. What do you guys think? That is pretty perfect. Beautiful. All right, so you know what? Let's add that to the other hammer. And a pretty cool trick here, since these are pretty much identical, all we have to do is say box collider, and we're going to say copy component. So I right-clicked on the gear here and said copy component. Then we're just going to come down here to the right hammer, and you can click here on this gear up here and right click and say paste component as new, and it pops up right there. All right, so now when we play this and we watch it in the scene, watch what happens. Yeah, there you go. The box collider is staying right on the hammer like we want it to. So looks pretty good, looks good. All right, so now let's go ahead and do that for our other enemy, the soldier. And let's see here, we actually want to come over here. There we go. And you may not So if you guys were just doing this on your own, you'd have to go through and find which bone it was. And for instance, with this one, it wasn't super intuitive right away which one it was. So you might have to go through and add some box colliders, figure out which one it's supposed to be. And it turns out that it's this guy right here, right finger 1 nub. And that's the one we want to add it to, okay? So I went through and I added it to, I think, hand first, and then this right finger 1, but this is the one we actually want. So I'm going to say add component and physics box collider. And let's go ahead and model this up a little bit. So we need let's shrink it in the Y direction, I think down to maybe 0.3. And let's go in the Z direction 2, or well, let's go 1, and then we'll move it in the Z direction to 1, or -1 looks like, -1, -0.8, -0.7, that looks good. And whoops, so that looks pretty good. It's not an exact fit quite as well as we got the hammer to be. Whoa. All right, let's get control here. All right, looks like we need to shrink it in the X direction as well. So X 0.3 as well. There we go. That looks better. Yeah, not bad, not bad. All right, that looks good. Cool. Yeah. All right. Awesome. So now let's play it and see if that box collider sticks nicely with the sword object during animation. And sure enough, that looks real good. All right. Awesome. All right, so we have our box colliders set for our tanker and our soldier. Now the ranger, he doesn't have a sword or a melee weapon. He's going to be shooting arrows at us, and we're actually going to ignore the ranger for quite some time because his attacks are different from the tanker and the soldier. We'll eventually get to his attacks as well, but for right now, he's just gonna kind of just wander around and not actually cause any damage for the time being. But eventually, we will get to his crossbow and arrows, and they'll be shooting arrows at us soon enough. But for now, he's just gonna stick around and hang out. Okay, so now let's add our swords to our hero. Okay, so open up the skeleton for her. And a trick here is if you press Alt and then click, it expands the entire directory for their skeleton. Okay, so everything under there shows up. And we need for her sword right 1 and sword left 1. All right, perfect. So let's start adding. So we're going to say add component. We're going to say physics box collider. So let's shrink that down in the X and Y directions. So maybe 0.3 and 0.3. And then we are going to move that in the Z direction, maybe 1. All right, that looks good. Yeah, that looks real good, actually. And, whoops. Let's see if that, you know what, that looks pretty good. We'll give the sword a little bit of an extra length. And then let's just copy this component again like we did with the tanker. Copy component and then head on down to sword right 1, add component, physics box collider, and you can right click and say paste component values. So that's two different ways that you can do. You can either create the component and then paste values as new, or you can say paste component as new. All right, so that's good. All right, so now when we play it and we do our attack, you can see that the box colliders follow right along with the sword in the animation. Perfect. All right, and so that's laying the groundwork for our next lesson, where we're going to actually start writing these enemy attack and player attack scripts, as well as the health scripts as well. So hope you're excited for that, and we will see you in the next one.